The inability to move on from someone isn't about love. It's about psychological confusion. The person you can't forget isn't holding power because of who they are, but because of what parts of yourself you've unconsciously projected onto them. Carl Jung discovered that our most intense attachments often have nothing to do with the actual person and everything to do with psychological projections, unconscious parts of ourselves that we've placed onto them. When someone becomes impossible to forget, you haven't actually lost them. You've lost touch with essential parts of yourself that you never realized you'd given away. This isn't about dismissing genuine love or grief. Jung understood that profound connections create real psychological bonds. But pathological attachment, the kind that destroys your peace and keeps you emotionally imprisoned, represents a fundamental confusion about where you end and others begin. The secret to moving on isn't about forgetting someone. It's about reclaiming the psychological energy you've invested in them and discovering that what you thought you lost was never theirs to begin with. The projection problem. Jung observed that humans unconsciously project their own psychological material onto others, especially during intense relationships. In The Relations Between the Ego and the Unconscious, he wrote, "Projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face." When you can't move on from someone, you're often unable to move on from projected aspects of yourself. Every quality you admire, fear, or desperately miss in another person represents something within your own psychological makeup that you've either disowned or never developed. The charismatic partner who made you feel alive carried your own unlived vitality. The confident friend who seemed to have life figured out reflected your own undeveloped self-assurance. Projection happens unconsciously and automatically. Jung noted that we project most powerfully onto people who can carry the projection convincingly, someone whose personality resonates with the disowned aspect of ourselves. This creates what feels like a perfect match, but it's actually a psychological mirage. The devastating pain of losing someone often comes not from losing their actual presence, but from losing access to these projected parts of yourself. When they leave, you feel incomplete because you genuinely are incomplete. Not because they took something from you, but because you never realized these qualities belong to you. The first step in reclaiming your projections is honest self-examination. What specific qualities made this person irreplaceable? What did they seem to possess that you felt you lacked? These answers point directly to the parts of yourself that need to be reclaimed. Participation mystique. Jung borrowed the term participation mystique to describe a psychological state where boundaries between self and other become dangerously blurred. In intense relationships, people unconsciously merge their psychological identities, creating what Jung called unconscious identity. When participation mystique develops, you lose the ability to distinguish between your emotions and theirs, your thoughts and theirs, your identity and theirs. Jung wrote in Psychological Types, "The subject cannot clearly distinguish himself from the object, but is bound to it in a relationship of almost mystical character." This explains why ending certain relationships feels like psychological death. You begin defining yourself through their responses, measuring your worth through their approval, and organizing your emotional reality around their presence. Your sense of self becomes so intertwined with them that their departure threatens your entire identity structure. Jung observed that participation mystique is particularly common in relationships where one or both people have weak individual identity development. Instead of two complete people choosing to connect, you have two incomplete people trying to create wholeness through merger. Breaking participation mystique requires what Jung called differentiation, the conscious process of separating your psychological material from theirs. This means identifying which emotions belong to you, which thoughts originate from your own mind, and which parts of your identity exist independently of their validation. Start by spending time alone without any contact or reminders of this person. Notice what remains of your personality, interests, and emotional life when their influence is completely removed. The Anima, Animus trap. Jung's concepts of Anima, the unconscious feminine aspect in men, and Animus, the unconscious masculine aspect in women, explain some of the most intense and difficult to release attachments. When someone embodies your contra-sexual archetype, The connection feels faded, mystical, and impossible to replicate. Jung wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. The anima is the archetype of life itself. When a man projects his anima onto a woman, she seems to embody everything vital and life-giving that he feels he lacks. When a woman projects her animus onto a man, he appears to possess all the strength and authority she feels she needs. These projections create relationships that feel larger than life because they're connecting you to archetypal energies rather than just personal qualities. The person becomes a gateway to parts of the psyche that feel essential for psychological completion. Anima-animus projections often manifest as instant recognition, feeling like you've known this person forever, or experiencing them as the missing piece of yourself. The relationship feels destined, meaningful beyond normal human connection. But Jung warned that no real person can carry the weight of an entire archetype. When they inevitably reveal their human limitations, the projection collapses, often creating devastating disillusionment. Moving on from anima-animus projections requires developing these qualities within yourself. Men must cultivate their own emotional depth and intuition. Women must develop their own authority and decisiveness. Withdrawing your projections. Jung's method for breaking pathological attachments centers on systematically withdrawing your psychological projections. Start by creating what Jung called psychological distance. This means eliminating contact temporarily, not as punishment but as a laboratory for examining your own psychological reactions without external interference. Next, practice what Jung termed active imagination. Visualize conversations with this person, but instead of focusing on what they might say, pay attention to what parts of yourself emerge in imagined dialogue. Often you'll discover that the voice you attribute to them actually represents disowned aspects of your own inner wisdom. Jung wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are." Projection prevents this privilege by keeping essential parts of yourself externalized. Withdrawing projections means reclaiming these disowned qualities and developing them within your own personality. Create a detailed list of everything you miss about this person: their confidence, creativity, humor, intelligence. Then honestly examine how much of each quality exists undeveloped within yourself. This exercise reveals the roadmap for your own psychological development. Begin cultivating these qualities independently. If you projected creativity onto them, start creating. If you projected confidence, begin taking risks. Jung observed that successfully withdrawn projections don't diminish appreciation for others. They enhance it. The path to psychological freedom. Jung's ultimate solution to attachment problems was individuation, the lifelong process of becoming psychologically whole and self-contained. He wrote in The Development of Personality, "The individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe." Individuation doesn't mean isolation or emotional numbness. It means developing such psychological completeness that relationships become choices rather than compulsions. You connect with others from abundance rather than need, appreciation rather than dependency. The path begins with what Jung called shadow work, acknowledging and integrating the disowned parts of yourself that you've been projecting onto others. This includes not just positive qualities, but negative ones too. True psychological freedom emerges when you can appreciate someone fully without needing to possess them, love someone deeply without losing yourself, and release someone completely without feeling diminished. Jung recognized that the most profound relationships occur between two individuated people who choose each other from wholeness rather than neediness. But this requires that each person first develop the capacity to be complete alone. The person you can't move on from has given you the greatest gift possible. They've shown you exactly what parts of yourself need to be reclaimed and developed. Your task isn't to forget them, but to become so complete within yourself that you no longer need anyone else to feel whole. Moving on isn't about finding someone better, it's about becoming someone complete.